Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and I'm already joined by John Hughes, and we're just waiting on Patrick McGilp, who slept in for the 12:30 bulletin. But as soon as he's available, he will be dialing in. John, I was reading yesterday's comments on the old YouTube, and one of them went, moan, moan, moan. Well, what do you expect? Do you expect us just to take it on the chin? We're raising points about our concerns around Celtic's recruitment. By the way, they've been echoed by Brendan Rodgers, who has gone through his team like a dose of the salts, John. Is he going to get the response tonight? That's a big question.
Well, he certainly needs to. And I ended up blocking someone with quite a big account, actually, on Twitter, just because, the response to this was morning on Monday morning, was morning moaning fans. And you're like, wait, so the manager has just said he was as angry as he has been in his entire career, right? And you're expecting us all to sit in the sidelines like nodding dogs, like trained seals clapping away without a conscious thought in our heads, and just moving on to the next one. He said it's in the past, let it go. He said it was yesterday. It was yesterday. Do you know what I mean? And, but some people just have this incredibly compliant, happy clappy attitude. It just drives me to distraction. If the manager is that furious about it, the fans are entitled to be annoyed as well, especially the fans that paid to go to the game. The fans are entitled to be annoyed, and they had a lot to be annoyed about in that first half. And the fact that they came out in the second half and played, he got the response he needed. The fact that they came out and played that way was great. But on the downside of that is, it's not as if we changed the entire team. So we made a couple of changes, turned out to be important, but that wasn't the defining factor. The defining factor was he put a rocket up them, which means that their attitudes were extremely poor, which is why he was so angry. I don't know, he would know that. So, to blame moaning fans, it's just so, in my view, it's just so pathetic. It's like the fans can moan or not moan. It's not going to make any difference. But we want to have a discussion about what's happening, to try and get some sort of handle on where we're going, what the future holds. Basically the reason we come on here to talk these things out is to either celebrate or to try and brace ourselves for what's coming.
Without a doubt. And the good thing I always find about it, John, is we now have probably all in the best part of 20 contributors, some every single week, some like me every day, unless I take a cheeky Monday off for other business, and others who come and go, which is great because what you get is that variety of opinion. I mean, I disagree time and time again with Kevin Graham, with Lawrence Connolly. We don't see eye to eye on a lot of things Celtic related, but that's what the discussion's all about. And often, if the person you disagree with builds a case, you come away from that discussion thinking, you know what, they're right, they've got a good point there. I think the moaning thing is there's an easy way to say, right, you're the treble winners, you've got a good lead at the top of the league here. And if and I think we are capable, by the way, and I'll come back to it, if we beat Feyenoord, we will end up with double the amount of points that we had in last season's Champions League group. Therefore, your European progress has been attained. Now, there's different ways you can do that with figures and all this kind of thing, John. But if I'm watching Celtic this season and I'm thinking, wait a minute, the fluidity isn't there, the tempo isn't there, the entertaining style hasn't been there for large parts of the season, and I'm not the only one thinking it. Rodgers was not happy with it on Sunday. So he's gone through the team. The team have responded in terms of their view on that 15-minute halftime break. It will be up there. It will be one of these defining moments, I hope, John. People going about the pre-match team talk that Martin O'Neill gave the guys before the Liverpool game. People going about what did Jockstein say to the guys in Lisbon in the dressing room. You wonder about these moments. What did Neil Lennon say when we were 3-0 down against Kilmarnock at Rugby Park in that half-time break? Yeah. And now we've got Brendan Rodgers with his wee moment. Is it going to be a watershed moment? Is it going to be a turning point, do you think?
I think it has to be, because with December coming up, if we get many more repetitions like we got in that first half, we could have thrown this away by the end of December. So we just can't have it. It's not, we can't have any sort of repetition of that. We have to win every single game. it's going to come down to usually the games between them and us. Now, we're basically, and I hate this, the fact that we're sort of hanging our hat on the fact that they're so terrible. That, it shouldn't be that way. We should be 100% confident in ourselves that we can take out these smaller teams. But now we're back to that. And it's really taken me back to like Lenny's, last season, and then, Brendan's last season. Well, we cannot guarantee a result against the weak teams or the weaker teams. You just can't guarantee it because they don't have the style or the personnel to break them down. And, you can say, is it personnel, is it tactics? Well, it's got to be a combination of both, frankly. But it has to be a turning point because we cannot tolerate a first half like we had before. And, excuse me, can I just say, Paul John, going back to, what we were saying last week, when I was ranting about the board last week, I did refer to Michael Nicholson as an accountant a few times. He's actually, I forgot, a solicitor. So I'm not sure if that's better or worse. But can I just do a wee analogy for you? I was watching this show there was a clip on TikTok, one of these border force things in Australia, and this boy arrives at customs and they're interrogating him because his story doesn't add up. Basically, he's saying he's there to see this girl he's been in an online relationship with for 10 years. He sent her $100,000 over those years, but it doesn't go to her account. It goes to her friend's account because she can't get an account because she doesn't have any ID, and he wants to be there and be a father for a wee boy and all the rest of it. And then he turns up, and amazingly, they interview him on the way back, and amazingly, she had just left town a couple of days before, but the friend that, had the account for the money, she was there, but this other woman had just left town the day before. And it's this clear and obvious catfish. And objectively, the guy is being told by the border force and the police and everyone else and all his friends, this woman doesn't exist. This is not real. And the way I look at this, that is like the board and us in Europe. We are the mugs being catfished because every year we get told something and we buy into it. We're like, oh, it'll be different this time. Or, well, yeah, it'll be absolutely great, despite the overwhelming evidence. And they're telling us what we want to hear. They're milking us for all the money, And in this case, we are the tragic saddos that someone objectively looking at would go, my God, can't you see what's happening here? So I was looking at a boy feeling sorry for him, and then I thought, wait a minute, that's me. That's us. That's the board in Europe. They're basically conning us out our money every year and delivering nothing. And there's been too many years where there's those results have been. You can't look at them any other way. Objectively, they've been horrific, and we have been basically hoodwinked, in my view. They have no ambition. Everything they've told us is just to cover over the fact that they don't want to go anywhere. They don't want to, try and achieve anything because it might impact the bottom line without any guarantees. And they're just not going to do it. And, you have to, at the point, I think people were fed up enough this year that you started to hear people saying, I'm not buying that package next year.
And this is people that buy it every year without question, John.
Without question. The most loyal of fans. And if you've managed to, really, really irritate your most loyal fans to the point they're thinking about, no, I can't carry on doing this. You have utterly failed. Now, I think it's Kevin Graham says, the sort of tourist types will, pick up the tickets. But why would they? I don't understand why they would. To see what? And anyway, back to your original point about 10 minutes ago. This is like a Billy Connolly skit. So it's basically you're saying, how do we do tonight? How do we turn it around? Well, excuse me, I do apologise. Effectively, I'm going to be fascinated tonight to see whether it was a turning point for Brendan, not just for the players, right? To see whether he's now decided we need to change tactics because this adherence to a 4-3-3 when you don't have any wingers, in my view, is madness, right? I think we can all see that we can all see that Kyogo and O up front could be a devastating strike force, right? So I either need to go 4-4-2 or 3-5-2. In my view, we do a 3-5-2. We go 3-5-2 because it takes Greg Taylor out the mix. To me, he's been such a weak link in the last few months. It's just been, everyone targets him. Just take away their ability to do that. And I think we go 3-5-2. We play 2 up front. We look for a different attitude. Maybe we definitely put Iwata in there. I would have him. I'm sorry, I'm jumping way ahead here, Paul John. But we definitely have Iwata in there because he brings that energy, enthusiasm, and dynamism. And I have no idea why he's not been getting played. We've been going on about it for I don't know how long. There must be something, but I don't see what it is. I don't see what the problem is. But I think you guys sort of covered it off yesterday. Is it just because that Callum McGregor is the one in front of him? Well, play Iwata a wee bit more forward then. I mean, the way he broke for that third goal the other day, I mean, that was impressive stuff. And
oh, yeah.
I've
so
always
much
thought
so that I've been saying it was Mikey Johnston all week. I thought it was a sprightly wee winger that did it.
His range of passing, I've always thought, is excellent. And he's certainly got the legs and he's got the physicality. He's got basically everything we need. The only thing that appears to be standing between him and playing every week is Callum McGregor. And I think you guys were saying yesterday that the stats show that, Callum's declining. Can he play further forward? And I have no doubt that would be a problem in Europe. But I don't think domestically it's a problem. I think Callum McGregor is more than capable of playing slightly further forward domestically. Can he take on Europe's top men? No, probably not. He's at that age. The legs are starting to go a wee bit. He's declining a wee bit every year. But can he do it domestically? I would have no concerns about that at all. I'd play him further forward. I'd play O'Reilly. I'd play Iwata. I would play the Mikey Johnson, and I would play what's his name on the other wing?
Palmer.
Palmer, thank you. She's absolutely took a blank there.
Thankfully, it was just cramp. When he
yes.
went down.
So I mean, to me, Palmer's more of a left midfielder than he is an attacker anyway. That's the way I see him. It's not as if he's hitting the byline. I think he's more of a sort of Beckham, midfielder in that position. That's the way I see him.
But he's got better hair, John. Much better hair. Palmer, oh yes. What an installation that is. I can see young Patrick, talking of great hair, is ready to come in. There you go. Patrick, how are you, my friend?
Not bad. Laptop issues there, so 12, 13 minutes late, but glad to be
That's
here.
all right. John and I have just been moaning because that's what we were accused of yesterday. It's like the Kevin Bridges sketch. Moan, talking about Michelle Moan you. I think you can do all of these things, John, but if you were to bring in Iwata, bring in Mikey Johnston, because I think he deserves it, bring in O, then I think you need to change the shape. It's like going back to what you said before. How do you accommodate all these guys in their best preferred positions and not change your shape? I don't think you can do that effectively. I'm going to ask you first, Patrick, just seeing how you've just came into the discussion here. My thoughts on tonight, if you were to change the shape, and Rodgers has done this before, he's done it with Leicester, and it's about playing with the three at the back. But your third, bear with me until I'm finished this, right? Because it doesn't start off good, but I can explain it. Your third centre-half wouldn't be Nat Phillips, right? It would be Iwata, but he would only be your third centre-half when you're defending. So in possession and in attack, he is playing that defensive midfield position where he's protecting the defence behind him. And I think you can do it that way so that he isn't, I don't think many games in Scotland at home particularly should we be playing with defensive midfielders anyway. Do we really need that? But I think he gives you that backup and that protection. If you play him in that roving role, he's going from defensive mid and then he's giving the cover to the guys if we are indeed defending. That would allow you, if you're not playing your fullbacks like John suggested, that would allow you then to change things up top. You could play O as the focal point with Kyogo behind them. Your midfield, for me, Matt O'Reilly, Callum McGregor, first two names on the team sheet. You've still got space in there for somebody like David Turnbull, who if Iwata moves forward, Turnbull does the same, Kyogo does the same because we're attacking. And then you've still got two wingers in Palmer and Mikey Johnson. Are you protecting the defence enough? Do you have enough defensive-minded midfield or offensive players? That's the big question. Because I don't know how good Palma is as a defender. Mikey Johnson's probably not as good as even Yang in terms of the defensive elements. Yang shouldn't be starting tonight, but I think defensively he's probably a wee bit better. So it would be a bold move and not one that we've really seen from Brendan Rodgers since he came back. But to try and accommodate the foreign players, I think you need a change of shape, Patrick.
Yeah, it could be something we explore, especially tonight at home. Obviously we don't want to change too much. Hibs are on a good run. I think they've got 3 wins in a row. I think they've picked up quite a lot of points since their new manager came in. So can't underestimate them at all. But I think you do need to try and fit these foreign players in. I wasn't a fan of Awata at centre half towards the end of last season. In the cup final, the last couple of league games. I know we're struggling for centre halves towards the end of last season, and it's where Kobayashi get found out. But I've never been a fan of 3-5-2, 3-4-3, the sort of three at the back. I'm not old enough to remember Martin O'Neill when Celtic had a lot of success with that formation. The only time I can really remember Celtic playing it was under Neil Lennon in the 3-4 months before COVID. So, it kind of worked then, but Lennon quickly ditched it after the COVID season had started. So, I'm not personally a fan of it, whether they've been working on it in training, whether what you suggest might work, Awata when we're defending, part of a back three, when we're attacking, maybe being a holding midfielder, letting the 7 players in front push forward. I think it's something that we could definitely explore. I'm surprised, actually, though, that we've not went to 4-2-3-1, because if you were to sort of accommodate Awata and McGregor and then let O'Reilly get forward in that sort of number 10 position, I'd be interested to see how that worked, because that's obviously the formation Rodgers played in his first time at the club. So I'm surprised that hasn't been trialled. But if we're still sort of labouring through games, because I think that's what we've been doing the past month or so. If we're still labouring through games, we might need to try different formations, different players. That's why we're talking about Mikey Johnson starting for Celtic, in the sort of December running, because he's actually brought a bit of insurgency and a bit of pace and a bit of life to the game, and he deserves to start tonight, in my opinion.
Can I just jump in there, Paul John, just to say, I think the most important takeaway from what you said there, Patrick, very insightful comments, is I'm not old enough to remember Martin O'Neill.
Honestly, Patrick, what a time to be alive, Martin O'Neill. And by the way, when I've had the absolute pleasure, and this is a big name drop, so give us a big klaxon for the name drop. I've had the pleasure of obviously sharing the stage with Martin O'Neill a few times, and we'll be doing it again in January. And, you cannot underestimate, although he never likes to take this kind of plaudit, you cannot underestimate his effect on Celtic's modern history, John. Because up to that point, obviously, with the 30th anniversary coming up of the takeover from Fergus McCann, it took us a period of time before we actually stopped Rangers' dominance of the league winning run that they were on. Once we finally did it, it wasn't as all of a sudden we had this great side. We had to go through the period of Venglos and John Barnes. Only when Martin O'Neill came to the club did we start to dominate Scottish football again. And we haven't stopped. Martin O'Neill was massive to that where we are today, the modern Celtic. Martin O'Neill was a massive reason for that, isn't he, John?
He is. And funny enough, one thing that ties in with Martin O'Neill, everyone knows about the games and the team and all the rest of it. The one thing that really ties in with the sort of modern supporter today is one of the first blogs I ever saw was on the back of what happened to the Seville money. And that was Paul Brennan.
I remember reading it. Was it Paul Brennan?
Paul Brennan. So that was Celtic Quick News. So Celtic Quick News became a massive force and, showed other people the way, this is digital media and this is how you do it. He was explaining, because the fans were just going nuts back then. It was very opaque. We didn't really have any clue what was going on. Where's all this money? Everyone was basically saying, where's all the money? I don't understand. We had this run and now we can't give the manager any support. Now, he did point out at the time that the money it wasn't a lot of money as Europa League and all the rest of it, but the board did fail to support Martin O'Neill in that transfer window after Seville. And if you look at what happened to those two clubs, Porto went on to win the Champions League the next year. What did we do? You know what I mean? Just for the sake of a few players, and it's been the mantra of our board. It seems to have been for the last 20 odd years. If you can do it wrong, do it wrong, and that's a bit harsh. But I mean, I'm just talking about in Europe from the results perspective. But Martin O'Neill was absolutely pivotal, but apparently will just remain pivotal on paper for Patrick. You can read about him, perhaps go and see him, and maybe your dad will tell you about him, Patrick.
Yeah, I've got VHS videos, Patrick, that I could lend to you, but they're these big, massive blocks. It's like a brick, but it's made of plastic, right? You might struggle to find a VHS player, but yeah, honestly, the impact of that man has been sensational in my lifetime.
Can I just say, Paul John, our board bought Betamax.
By the way, I've got a couple of Betamax Celtic videos also, but Patrick, you don't even want to know what these are. Top Loader, you just think it's a band. No, they were the days. They were the days. The one thing I would say, if you were to play a formation like this that I was talking about, it's attack. It really is, where you're looking to absolutely dismantle teams and overrun them. Where you're overloading the midfield, your centre halves, and I think they've got the passing range, particularly Scales, would need to be looking for Palma and MJ rather than the fullbacks. They need to be missing out that middle area and go right to the wings, and you would be basically you'd be playing the opposite to how we played at the weekend, where you'd be coming out the traps and just attacking a Hibs side or a Motherwell side at home. It seems all a wee bit safe, but with that you get into a tempo, John, and I feel that the Celtic side's been struggling to get back out of that tempo, and it was obviously the hairdryer treatment at half-time that sparked them into life. Some players don't respond well to that, but I think that when you look at Mark O'Reilly, for example, or some of the other guys who have really improved under Brendan Rodgers and have never seen that side of him, the response that we are going to get will be for there tonight for everyone to see. If there's a player who's playing within themselves, you think to yourself, you're the type of guy that needs a cuddle. You don't need a rollicking. But there's some players who love it. They need it actually to motivate them, John. It's a bit old school, but I'm glad that he took it, and it seems to so far have made an impression.
Yeah, he's been very. He's been quite harsh, really. When you look, he repeatedly said, he went on many different platforms and said how angry he was. He threw Mark Lowell essentially under the bus and then reversed over him. So he's not taking any prisoners now. Essentially, what I think has happened here, I think I said this before, Brendan came in and he was sort of wrapped up in the prodigal son narrative, and he was impressed by how slick the operation looked. Yeah. But I don't think he had been really analysing the outcomes. If you look at the players we've signed since Mark Lowell was in, we were looking at a list earlier on there. There's literally, I don't know, maybe about 30, 40 players, but I don't know how many there are. We didn't have a chance to count them. But there's only a handful that you could attribute to him that have been in any way successful, never mind absolutely successful. So, I think he was looking at that and thought, okay, this will be easy. I can trust these guys. And I think he's trusted them too much. We have knowledge of a couple of conversations that happened which show that the level of detail you would think people are getting into in these is not what you would think. And players have got into the club that if you've been looking at their stats beforehand properly, if you've been doing a real analysis and thinking, well, wait a minute, what is the real potential here? You'd have been surprised at really how poor those stats were. You'd have been surprised they actually got to the club. You'd be surprised the manager signed them off, because I think when we're talking about the manager signed them off based on what we know. I think the manager signed them off is just that. I think he's basically just saying, that's grand. I trust you guys to do your job. And I think he's now realised that is a mistake. And I think he's consequently and hopefully going to make changes. Now, and already we're doing the same thing as we do in Europe. We're already projecting our hopes onto this transfer window that's coming, right? But there's no evidence at all that we are ever. Well, we've had one decent winter transfer window, right? And that was under Ange, and that was his guys that were all guaranteed. So, there's no evidence of us ever investing serious money in the winter transfer window. There's no evidence that we're capable of sourcing them. We had 4 months in the summer. What makes you think that it's going to happen in the winter transfer window, in the January transfer window? I just don't, I'm trying not to be down about it, or I'm trying not to be downbeat about it, but I caught myself doing it the other day. We'll sort all this out in January. There's just no evidence for that. There's just no evidence at all for that. If we couldn't get it done in the summer, why will we get it done in January? Right? We didn't even get close to it in the summer. We didn't even plug the gaps, never mind make the team better. And we have irrefutably gone backwards. Absolutely irrefutable, we have gone backwards, right? So, he's talking about we needed 4 in the summer and we need 4 now. You were in charge, mate. I don't know who else we can blame. You're in charge of Mark Lowell. You're his boss. And if you let him run riot and you're not happy with the results, then he needs to get in the bin. And you need to take control of it. Or you need to set in someone else who is. There's no point. It's really... he needs to be... It's a dangerous game he's playing there, Brendan, to some extent, trying to throw Mark Lowell under the bus, because it is his football department. He is in charge of the football department.
And that's on the back, John, that's on the back of the comments that Brendan made in relation to who's got the final sign-off of each individual player. So, in effect, he's taken ownership of the 9 signings in the summer, and now he's saying, well, actually, the quality's not there. And you could say, well, were you looking for 13 players then? Because you've just said that you needed 4 quality players. You got the 9 that you might want to work with, and you didn't get the 4 that you wanted. Because I understand why he's claimed ownership. I've said this before, Patrick. If you don't, then you could lose those 9 guys. 9 players out of 33, 32 at the moment. 33 when we signed Miofsky, 32 at the moment. Those 9 guys are a serious percentage of that squad. You don't want to lose their confidence by saying, listen, you're no my player. He did it before with Marian Sved. We signed Marian Sved for 1.7 million quid. And he's obviously asked the question in the next press conference, right? And he says, we don't need any more wingers. We've got millions of wingers. Welcome to the club, Marian. You can't do that because you'll lose the confidence of that player instantly, don't you?
Yeah, you do. And I think Brendan was well on his way out when he made that comment back in, I think it was January 2019.
Operation Terminado, I think it was called. Yeah.
You do sort of wonder, he made those comments at the AGM, and then within I think it was 6 days after the Lazio game, I need more quality. So quite happy with what he brought in, but then 6 days later, we need more quality, lads. So it's he says one thing at the AGM and another thing to the press after a game. I agree with his latter comments. I think we do need more quality. But we also need to trim the squad. And as John says, there's no guarantee of that happening in January. I think we're all hoping it's going to happen. I think we'd all convinced ourselves that Rodgers had came back and we're going to take Europe more seriously and we're going to try and have a stab at the Europa League. And, we'd all deluded ourselves, and, that's obviously not happened. We've taken a backward step. And I think we're all convinced that we're going to sign 2 quality players in January. And I hope we do, but, there's absolutely no guarantee. And you say there, we've got 32 players, 33 when Miofsky comes in. I don't know how serious this is. I just seen the story at 10:30 last night, the sort of breaking news. I can't understand that one at all. I mean, 4 million for a backup striker from Aberdeen. It boggles the mind, in my opinion. I mean, we're trying to trim a squad, and yet we're wanting to spend 4 million on a third choice player. We're going to weaken a team that only ever turns up against Rangers. Why we'd look to do that, I don't know. He's not going to play ahead of Kyogo. And when you're talking about adding quality, this is all in the context of competing in Europe. So if you're going to add quality, you're adding players that can compete in Europe. So can Majowski play in the Champions League? I very much doubt it. Maybe we will sign him. Maybe he'll be the new Henrik Larsson. I don't know. I very much doubt that. He scored a couple of goals for Aberdeen, but he's the main man for Aberdeen. He's not going to be the main man for Celtic. He's going to come off the bench and be a target man and play the last 30 minutes. And surely that won't happen. I mean, it's like Scott McKenna all over again, signing an Aberdeen player for £5 million that patently isn't good enough. So yes, hopefully the window is a productive one and a lot better than January. But there does seem to be a bit of politicking going on. You don't really know who's in charge. You don't really know what Lawwell and Rodgers think of each other at the moment, because certainly since May last year, their signings have been questionable, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the Majowski thing, I threw that in as a kind of throwaway comment, but this is what's been circulating in the Scottish media. How much of that you're going to read into, I don't know. We've been linked to 4 different attackers, to my knowledge, Majowski being one of them. Van Hooijdonk, we asked Pierre about his son Sydney. He said there's nothing in it. Whether or not there's been something developed in the last 5 or 6 weeks, who knows? Kvitsgarden, Matthias Garden from Bromby, he's a player I like. He fits the age profile, but you're talking even more than the 4 million that you mentioned there for Majowski, Patrick. So you think to yourself, I don't think anyone is signed as a third choice, but you're going to have to displace Kyogo. And if his attitude is I'm the number one, that's good enough for me. Bringing somebody in, and then you've got a right fight for the jersey. And the other one I've seen mentioned, and I don't see there being any truth in this one, because it's taking all your points and adding even more to it, Patrick, is Lawrence Shankland. I mean, for me, if you want to improve your squad, if you want to improve in Europe, that's not the type of signing that I would expect Celtic to be making. I'll go back to the centenary year. I remember when Billy McNeill was rebuilding the side, and he didn't want Billy Stark to be the first signing, even though on paper he was, because he knew that it would be underwhelming for the Celtic fans to be signing a 60 grand midfielder from Aberdeen, as it was. Billy Stark turned out to be one of the best signings we made, but he knew that the workings in the media and the fans' expectation going into the centenary year. So I think if you go into January and that's your first signing, Majowski, it might be quite underwhelming. John, let us know in the comments, by the way, do you disagree or agree with Patrick in relation to that? But it's the quality that we're talking about. That's the word that Brendan Rodgers has been using time and time again. In his first press conference when he took over at Celtic, his words were, Europe is always a big factor for this club. He was being asked 3 days after he came back to Celtic about his European aspirations, and that was the exact words that he used. He then went on to speak about the changes, John, in the strategy of recruitment, and he said that he could see a clear change in that infrastructure. Were they just giving him the presentation that included Kyogo, Matt O'Reilly, Rio Atati and Dyson Maeda? Because obviously there's been a lot of signings after that didn't quite work out as well, did they?
No, there has been a clear change in infrastructure because there was no infrastructure. So that's a pretty clear change. So I think he was just happy when he came back. He wasn't expected to do everything, because I think he knew, we all know, after all those years in England, his knowledge of any players that we could sign are pretty much non-existent. So he's the opposite of Ange. He's not bringing anything at the table from that point of view, because his knowledge would all have been based around guys who you'd be signing for a casual 40, 50 million. There is no reason why you'd have been discussing anyone that we would be looking at. So I think he was relieved that he wasn't, the onus was not on him, and that there was a focal point somewhere else and there was a department supposedly doing this. But I think he's been sorely disappointed. I certainly think that's what he's trying to convey. I think he's basically trying to tell us, look, I know this isn't good enough. and now I'm letting you know that I know it's not good enough. But he either needs to, convince the board and Mark Lawwell to change focus on the type of player that we're looking at, or he needs to take control himself. But this is the start of it, though. And as you say, we've been down this road before, because you don't come out and say this sort of stuff unless there's a meaning behind it. I mean, Ange did it once. Ange said it once, they were too slow, and then he got the guys that he wanted. But Ange was tailor-made for this board, because he was shopping in the bargain basement, except he knew where all the bargains were. So, we weren't relying on some hooky stats telling you a guy from the South Korean second division is the very man for the job. Again, I was listening to Jim Orden that, and he did the whole North Korean for the. I'm not sure how many players are coming out of North Korea. Not sure anyone's getting out of North Korea at all. But the whole. So Yang, for instance, as I say, I mean, his stats. If you look at his stats before we signed him, if you can find one compelling reason why we signed him, I'd love to know what it is, because there was nothing there, absolutely nothing there. So did someone, have him watched and then say that's the very man? Because again, who's deciding then? If that's the case, if there's no absolute metric, who's deciding on the standard here? And I think that the standard has just been really overall extremely poor. A lot of these guys are less of a project, more competition winners, and just grateful to be here. And they'll suck up wages and resources, and they'll never kick a ball for us in anger. It's just, what is the point of? You're literally saying, what is the point in half this squad? There's nothing there, and that half of them are never going to make it.
This is a frustration, John, because when we're talking about European aspirations, it's almost like, well, we can't compete. That was the attitude of Ian Bankier at the time, the previous chairman. It's almost like we can't compete, so what's the point? But I think there's a middle ground between the player you've mentioned and Kwon, who we've not seen yet in a competitive game. He's £1 million. He's a South Korean second tier. There's a middle point somewhere between Kwon and, as you say, the casual 50, 60, 70 million pound footballer that a lot of the Champions League teams will be bringing in. We go on about having 70 million in the bank. These guys are spending that on one player, and the one player's no guaranteed to get a game. Totally get it. But there's a middle point somewhere that Celtic need to be operating in, and it's not in the South Korean second division. Kwon could potentially go through this season and no play. Now that's embarrassing, that you're going to spend £1 million on a player and there's no real reason, there's no real structure to the purpose of bringing him to the football club, other than the fact that we were meant to be playing a friendly against Wolves, and it was obviously all lined up that we would be announcing these two players from South Korea whilst we were in the country and all that kind of stuff. I'm sorry, but let's go beyond that and let's get the quality on the park. If Brendan Rodgers wanted 4, that's his words, he wanted 4 quality players, John, and I'm going to throw this to Patrick as well. How many did he get from the 9 that came in? Now, I'm going to give you my view. Yang's played a bit of football. Do you class him as quality? Palma has played a bit. Odin Holmes played a bit. The rest of them, bit part cameo or not at all. So of the 4 quality, did we even get 1? Is Palma in that category? What do you think?
I would say Palma's the only one for me that you could put in that category. Yang, again, he looks raw, but he's going to have to come on a whole bunch. He's going to have to come on an absolute storm to even be consistent in the team. As I say, his original stats were really just bang average, if not verging on really quite poor. So he's come in, he's looked as if he could play quite well in spells. But then you have a half like he had the other day, and that's one of the worst halves of football I've seen from a wide player at Celtic in a very, very, very long time. The inability to look across a line and keep yourself on side is, pretty fundamental to your job. So, it was poor. His output was poor. I mean, to be fair, our output from the wings has been desperately poor. And I made a snarky comment about the fact that, Mikey Johnson come on, and Mikey Johnson looks like Maradona in comparison to Yang, and that should be the beginning of the end of your days at Celtic, that sentence. But that's harsh on Mikey Johnson, because I think Mikey's gone away and it looks like he's come back and he's stronger and braver. And he has contributed quite a lot, actually, in the last few. I mean, the last game he won the penalty and he put the ball on Yang's head for what should have been the winner. He's come on to this one. He's got a lovely wee flick on in the middle of the second goal move. He's direct, and people might get frustrated about his output. But the one thing you can definitely say about him now is he has courage, and that's the one thing you need from your wide players. The players who you look to for a bit of magic, they have to be courageous, because they have to be able to get it wrong, get back up and go again immediately, and try and do the same thing. Don't be dissuaded. Don't hide. There's nothing worse than an empty jersey. Don't hide. Get in there and do it. If it's not working out, you'll get hooked and all the rest of it. That's fine. But don't hide. Get in there and play with some heart. And Mikey Johnson has done that. And as I said one time, discussing my dad's, you need to have the courage to continue creating. And he has at least got that. His output might not be exactly where we want it, but we don't know yet, because he hasn't full games yet. But he has certainly contributed massively in the last couple of games, and he has to start. It's not even a question. He has to start.
Here's the question then. When was his last start for Celtic, Patrick? Mikey Johnson. When was the last time he started the game for Celtic? He's not started this season. It's all been substitute appearances this season, hasn't it?
Aye. And then last season, he went out on loan the whole season. So the season before, under Ange, he started the League Cup final under Ange, December 2021. It's possible that was it. Just from memory, I can't remember one after that.
Couple of years
ago. Yeah, December 2021.
Yeah.
It's just because that injury crisis, because Owen Moffat came on in that game.
Well, right.
Yeah. Just playing random players.
Where is he now? Where is Owen Moffat now? Because he's not Blackpool anymore. Is he at the Pars? Wow.
I believe he is,
because Dembele is now at Blackpool, isn't he? He's setting up goals for Jordan Rhodes. All the great names. Yeah. So there's my starting 11. Let me know in your comments what you think. I'm going to come to the comments in just a second, because obviously we've got a wee bit carried away there. We're 42 minutes in, and I've not even brought up any comments. My 3-5-2, and please bear with me with Iwata at centre half, because I can see us pushing him into the midfield when we're attacking, and I hope that for the vast majority of tonight's game we will be attacking. It's Hart, Carter Vickers, Scales and Iwata, with Palmer, Matt O'Reilly, David Turnbull, Callum McGregor, Mikey Johnson, Owen Kyogo up top. Very much an attacking formation. You would have your fullbacks on the bench just in case it wasn't going to plan. You had to try and revert back to type, but I don't see any reason why we can't get the on-form players all on the pitch, all at the same time. Double Denim, always an absolute pleasure to see you. If you're watching on YouTube, like the video. Subscribe to us if you want to comment. We've got a big charity weekender coming up, and I've decided it's taken me that long to edit the Pierre Van Hooijdonk and George Cadet and John Collins interview. I'm just going to save it until the charity weekender, and it'll form part of that. And loads of other content coming your way. Afternoon, folks. Great to see the Celtic players at the Children's Hospital serenading some of the kids. Something's just so much greater than football. That's the impact that the team can have on a charitable level. The stuff that the club does is phenomenal. We've got our own wee contribution coming up as well. So it's great to give that a shout out. Joseph McGonigal, Iwata to start tonight. Let's see if Cal has the legs to do what he does for Scotland. Patrick, this is in reference to some people who don't think he does. Some people who say that the data will suggest Callum McGregor cannot play a more offensive role. Do you buy into that?
Well, it's been a while since we've seen him playing a more offensive role. He's obviously get quite far forward for his goal, his equaliser at the weekend there.
Great finish.
I remember at the end of Rodgers' second season, Sinclair was in really poor form. And I want to say, actually, the 5-0 game against Rangers when we won the league, McGregor actually played out wide left in that game. And I think he played there for towards the end of that season. I thought he done quite well, retained the ball pretty well. Good passer, obviously. I wouldn't play him further forward. It's hard to say. I would give him the freedom to get further forward, but I wouldn't play him in the sort of pressing role that O'Reilly and Atati have been playing in the last 18 months or so. I don't think he's got the legs for that. But the freedom to get forward, sort of make that killer pass, have a few shots and goal, a bit like what he done under Lennon, to an extent. But I don't think he's regressing. I think people are making the comparison to Scott Brown. I think it's very early days for that. I think he's had a couple of off games. First couple of games of the season he was a wee bit poor. Last couple of weeks he's maybe made a few mistakes, but I think it's because we're always expecting 8 or 9 out of 10 from Callum McGregor, and he's been so good for so long, so consistent, and he plays. I mean, when we played qualifiers in 6 group games and 9 cup games and 38 league games and then 10 games for Scotland, he was playing 60, 70 games a season for 3-4 seasons in a row. That's obviously going to take its toll. I know he never really played professional football till he turned 20, but I think it is. We're not in the League Cup this year. We've only got 6 European games, but I think it's certainly time to consider managing his game time, because I still think he's a top quality player. One of the best, if not the best, Celtic players in the squad. Manage his game time. You've seen him coming off 60, 70 minutes in games recently, but I don't think he's regressing by any means. And I think he's, if he's capable for doing it for Scotland, then of course he's capable doing it for Celtic. It's just about how the team's set up and what the manager wants him to do.
Yeah, I know. I'm of the same view, and I think we've seen a wee bit more of that resting periods of Callum McGregor since Brendan Rodgers has come back. Never before, really, were we used to seeing him getting hauled off with 20 minutes to go, Patrick. We've seen it this season, and it's good because over the period of 3 or 4 games, you're basically resting him for a game. And that for me is key. He's still there. He's still got that influence. And I listed the players that I think are, at this moment in time, ready for a Champions League campaign. He's one of them that's already in the squad. Danny Boy, first time I went to Parkhead, Jimmy McGrory was manager. Not great times. That's incredible. It's great that you're tuning in, Jimmy McGrory. So the first time you went to see Celtic was 65 or before, which is incredible. What a dedication to supporting Celtic. And I love all these old-timers. Sorry, Danny, for calling you an old-timer. John, who have got the tales. They've got the tales of the old days. Because I remember one time coming into contact with this old guy locally in one of the villages, a place called Blair Hall. And I'm going to say his name is John Wilson. I think his name is John Wilson. And I got chatting away to him, and he started talking about Celtic. And he must have been in his late 80s when I'm talking to him, 90s, maybe even. I think he was in his early 90s. And he says, I used to play for Celtic. And I'm thinking to myself, John, I tell my boy that. So, he's maybe just telling me, how can I prove or disprove him? I was like, who was your manager? Mealy. And I'm thinking, wow. The old guy played for Celtic. He was signed by Willie Mealy. I was thinking, this is incredible. But yeah, he did. I'd done all my research, and a guy who does loads of research and something of a Celtic head called Tom Minogue from this area. He sent me some information on this old guy, and I'm thinking, a generation later, all that information's gone. Nobody will be able to tell you, John, what Willie Mealy was like, because nobody's still alive, nobody's still around that spoke to the guy. We need to capture all this stuff.
Well, he's a real focus here in Newry, as you know, because his statue is now at the bottom of the street here. And there's another couple of tributes to him around the town. So he was a Newry man originally. But I mean, I've been schooled. It's been a privilege for me. One of the great things about Twitter is it's a privilege for me to have guys who were. I mean, I never saw my dad play. Do you know what I mean? So these guys are able to tell you, guys who were like, 15, 16, even up to sort of 20 years old when they were watching them play. They're able to tell you every single game and what they did here and there. So that education is absolutely priceless, but you wouldn't get it anywhere else. And that's the beauty of social media for me, because I've got this sort of community of people who had an opinion on him as a player, not just based on something they read, but based on years of watching him play, which is absolutely remarkable. And it's remarkable that these guys can use Twitter as well, because it was, my dad could hardly use his phone, never mind Twitter. So it's amazing to me that they're on there in the social media and working away with it. So I get schooled every day, and it's been an absolute pleasure to learn all about the history of the club, at that time, and individual games and what people's opinions were. And just like today, they can't agree for a second.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean? Someone gives an opinion on a player, even whether it be my dad or someone else, someone gives an opinion on a player, and 5 minutes later someone's in saying, no, that's garbage. You're insane to think that. I don't know what game you think you're watching, and this is like 60 years later. So it's nothing really has changed from that perspective, but it's great to be able to have this community here and have the communities in places like Twitter where we can all get together and be nice to each other occasionally, and also shout at each other. As long as it's about opinions on football, that's all that matters.
The thing is, John, you're right. It hasn't changed. This is not a new phenomenon. It's just the platform has changed. These kind of conversations would have been happening in boozers and supporters buses, and all the way through the history of the football club. The one thing that I'm going to hold on to is when I started doing research for Celtic books, I spoke to the historians, the late David Potter, Tom Campbell, and Pat Woods. And Pat said to me that there is always more to discover about Celtic's history. You'll never discover everything. And I remember then, at that point, not knowing Neely Mockin, whose dad was a Celtic legend, and eventually getting access to Neely's collection, which obviously his son now has, and just thinking, wow, I've got this stuff in my hands, John. I've got Jock Stein's whistle in my hand, and you can see pictures of Stein on the training pitch at Barrowfield with a whistle with the bootlace around his neck, and I've got it, all that stuff. And I think at some point there's going to be a find, and it'll probably be from a distant family member of someone like Willie Maley, who will have an absolute cornucopia of Celtic history that nobody's ever seen before. It's going to happen in my lifetime, and I hope and pray it does. If it was an issue with the culture at the football club, and I'm talking about the players, Patrick, that was an issue, that would worry me more than quality, because I think that the big concern we had the last time round was the culture under the previous manager, Neil Lennon, in that last season. And it was difficult for Neil to manage that when he was under the COVID restrictions. And I think that maybe at the time, getting caught up in where we were, Patrick, it was hard to see the wood for the trees there. Neil Lennon would have managed that differently if we didn't have the restrictions, and we've got to take that on board. But it was the cultural issue that bothered us, and I think we started talking about that after the Ferencváros game, when Neil Lennon was talking about there's guys in that dressing room don't want to play for this football club. So that was a cultural issue. This time round, it's a quality issue. And you think to yourself, well, we've got a manager in place who can get the maximum quality out of the players we've got. And we've got an infrastructure, we believe, we are told, in place where we can find the quality. So it's fixable. It's less worrying than the situation we were in before, in my view, Patrick. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean that COVID season was just a disaster from the very beginning. We beat Ackies obviously, and then Lennon gives them 2 or 3 days off, and then we drop points. We're banned for 2 weeks, and we lose to Ferencváros, and then it's just downhill rapidly. And as you say, it was hard to see the wood for the trees. The thing about taking 2 buses, and we were the only team taking 2 buses to away games and stuff. It was, you could write a book in that full season, really, and I'm sure Lennon probably will one day, because it was crazy just how much was going on, and how hard it must have been inside Celtic Park to handle all that. And it was true. There was 4 players, we all know who they were, who were either promised moves or had down tools, and it's so difficult to manage that. And I don't think we're in that situation. I think we're far away from that at the moment. If we are in that situation and if players do want to leave, then I would just sell them. I think everyone realises that you can't keep a player who's unhappy. There's absolutely no point in it at all. So just don't play them, sell them the nearest opportunity. So I'd like to think there isn't an attitude problem. Certainly going back to July and August, you heard Matt O'Reilly and Callum McGregor talk about how brilliant it is to not to have a change, but to have Brendan Rodgers as our manager, and how sort of vibrant and energetic he is, and sort of the smiling and the happiness and sort of the way he just chats to players over lunch, and they all seem quite happy to have him as the manager. So I don't think it's that. I think the manager is correct. I think it just is a lack of quality. I think we sort of have fudged that most recent transfer window, and I think Palmer probably is the only player of quality that we signed. There's questions over Narowski could come good, Lagerbielke could come good, although I don't think Brendan rates him. I think Holm will come good. I think he's shown a fair bit so far already. When you're defining success, how long it takes these guys to come good, I think. If it takes them 3 years to come good, that's probably not a successful signing, in my opinion. No. But I think, they might come good sooner rather than later. So, I think we need another 2-3 players of quality to get back to where we were at the end of last season.
I think we need another 2 or 3 players of quality just to make sure we still have to take 2 buses to a game. But the thing that concerned me, Paul John, was actually what you said about Narowski, or Rocky. We'll just call him Rocky because I'm not good with the names. But anyway, the big man looked to be pretty decent when he came in, and I'm surprised that he hasn't had a shout since then. I know Scales has done well, but we spent a lot of money on the boy, and I'm surprised he hasn't had a look in since. That was pretty worrying. Lagerbielke we already knew about. Tillio hasn't shown a thing yet, which is deeply worrying also. But again, we still have enough there, really, with the right attitude and playing the right tactics to win this league comfortably if the attitude is right. But the thing about the attitude was it clearly wasn't right the other day, because, as I said right at the start, nothing much changed really, apart from a couple of substitutions. We came on and they were Big O brought the very first touch of quality in the game with that back heel, and we immediately score a goal. That was the first unexpected thing someone had done for the whole game. Immediately the goalies palmed it out and McGregor's hit it home. We have the players there. I just think, as we're talking about the formation, we need to get these players on the pitch. And I just don't understand why we're so wedded to a certain formation. Oh, it's like, the players, they're comfortable playing it. Well, comfortable isn't really the friend of ambitious.
No.
So I don't really see how that helps us. And the fact you had to give people a rocket the other day, I understand that. You're coming off the Lazio game and all the rest of it, and you're just like, here we go again, bottom of the table, we'll just go out there, we'll pass it around a wee bit, and, we'll get the break. And that wasn't happening, and so they got the rocket, and rightly so. But the attitude needs to be managed just as much as anything else. And you can't assume that because they're professional players, they will have the right attitude, because they're human beings, same as anyone else, and they need to be managed very closely. And it could be that they are all very happy to have Brendan Rodgers as the manager, and that might be a bad thing. You know what I mean? Because if they're all super comfortable with Brendan and Brendan's their buddy, that's not necessarily a good thing. That's not the way Martin O'Neill did it, for instance. Patrick, you remember, he's a figure in Celtic's history, Patrick. You remember him back then. But he was very much of the Brian Clough school of management, wasn't he? He only turned up on a Saturday, really, to give people a bollocking if they needed it, or pick the team and all the rest of it. So it was, there are different styles, but it could be that Brendan is maybe thinking now he's just needs to put a rocket under them, and it seems that he's done that. And based on the second half and the changes he made in the second half, I would hope that tonight we go out with the right formation and we give Hibs an absolute spanking. And I think there's no reason why we can't. Although I did read that Brendan's record against him's really very poor. But hopefully tonight will be the change in that.
We blow it away. Yeah, Brendan treating his players like flowers. Absolutely. He'll be singing to them next. Alan Robertson spoke about Brian Clough there. Yeah, completely different days, isn't it? But sometimes the old school motivational speech is what you need. Joe Henry, those two Betamax are due back under the counter at Oakley General Store. Under the counter, Joe. I'm not quite sure what would have been on the tapes then. Oakley General Store. I remember that they had a video shop called Global Video, and I've still to pay my fine for returning Braveheart late because I just kept it for an extra week. But if you're out there, I don't even think they exist anymore. Sorry about that.
Can I just add one thing there about how important it is? We talk about the board and all the rest of it, and how important it is to have a vision, and how important it is to be anticipating, and how important it is to be constantly growing, because the world moves on without you if you're not. And you take businesses like Blockbuster Video, for instance. A bit of technological change. That was huge. It was so big. Such a massive business. Just gone. Just done. And that was the end of it. And so, I mean, I'm not suggesting that will happen here, but again, if we don't cement ourselves properly in Europe and have a bit of ambition, we'll end up having to qualify every year. We'll end up not qualifying, then your 70 million will suddenly be 7 million, then minus 7 million. So as I said before, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you are intent not to invest in the business as you should, and this is the other thing, sorry Paul John, I know we're running over, this is the other thing. There's a huge amount of businesses and there's a huge amount of business analysts that will tell you, depending on what your business is, having a pile of cash in the bank is a sign of a problem, not a sign of a success, because that cash should be getting invested elsewhere. So having some big, massive war chest isn't necessarily always a good thing, especially when you have ambitions to achieve. You should be putting that back into the business, especially when it's this kind of business where nearly all the shareholders are looking to see what's happening on the park and not just in it for the return on their money. Yeah,
you're right. And by the way, I would throw in there, and this is a deeper discussion that we'll need to come back to, is this bloated squad, 32 players. There is a correlation between the fact that we don't have a youth production line that we used to have, in that we're basically stockpiling players from other people's youth production lines, be that the South Korean second division, etc., for £1 million. In the past, if we needed that guy, we could have gone to the reserve team or the next youth talent, and he would have been that guy. We don't have it. There's a missing link in there, and in the meantime, what we're doing is we're stockpiling all these other players because we're not producing our own. That's something that needs to be looked at, and hopefully we can have a discussion about that in the future. Tonight, it's all about Celtic against Hibs. I'll be back here half an hour before kick-off with Kevin McCluskey. We're almost at 14 million views on YouTube. Get involved, subscribe, give us a thumbs up, get involved in the chat, the whole thing. And obviously, we will tell you when we hit that magical target. It should be within the next week or so, just before the end of the year. Thanks, everybody, for your support. Thanks for getting involved in the comments. And thank you to John Hughes and Patrick McGill for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
Hail, hail.